You are not here to convince them. You are not here to defend who you are. You are here to live it. But most people spend their lives trying to explain themselves to a world that's not even listening. They craft the perfect response. They chase the perfect tone. They plead for a little more understanding. But the more they explain, the less they are heard. And that is the trap. The moment someone questions your character, your beliefs, your silence, you feel it. That internal fire. That urge to jump in and set the record straight. To say, no, that's not what I meant. Let me clarify. Let me fix your perception of me. But here's the truth nobody wants to face. Every time you explain yourself to someone who is not trying to understand you, you give away your peace. You surrender your power. Not because you were wrong, but because you agreed to play by their rules. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them." In other words, it is not the misunderstanding that breaks you. It is the belief that you must fix it. You think your words can untangle someone else's projection. You think if you say it just right, they will finally see who you really are. But you are not in charge of how people see you. You are only in charge of how you carry yourself when they don't. And that is where the shift begins. See, most people would rather be understood than be in control. They would rather be liked than respected. They give away something sacred in exchange for temporary comfort. But the Stoic knows better. The Stoic walks into the storm and does not flinch, because they are not here to perform. They are here to stand, to remain unmoved, unbothered, unshaken. If someone misunderstands you, let them. If someone twists your silence into guilt, let them. You are not responsible for the stories they create in their minds. Your only responsibility is to remain centered in the truth you live, not the one you explain, because explaining does not protect you. It weakens you. You say, "But I want them to know I meant well. I want them to see my intentions." And I say, why? So you can feel safe? So they can give you permission to be who you already are? That is not the way. You do not need permission to be whole. You do not need approval to have peace. The need to be understood is a craving of the ego, and the more you feed it, the more it owns you. You must learn to sit in the discomfort of being misunderstood, because that discomfort is where your freedom begins. That silence, that space, that pause between accusation and reaction, that is where your power lives. And once you taste it, you will never go back to explaining again. There is a kind of silence that does not shrink, a silence that does not apologize or retreat. It stands tall, without saying a word, and it changes everything. Imagine this: a room full of people. Someone throws a subtle jab your way. Maybe they mock your choices, question your path. They wait. The room waits, and all eyes turn to you. Now you have a choice. You can react, you can explain, or you can let the silence breathe. Because silence, real silence, is not passive. It is presence. When you choose not to react, you are not avoiding the moment. You are owning it. You are saying, "I do not dance to your rhythm. I move on my own time." That kind of stillness is unsettling to people, because most are used to reaction. They poke, you flinch. They accuse, you defend. They lie, you scramble to correct. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you let their words float in the air and do not catch them? What happens when you stare straight through the noise and do not blink? I'll tell you what happens. The energy shifts. The one who expected your performance is left with their own projection, and that projection begins to unravel. You do not need to defend your worth. You do not need to argue your value. You need only to remain grounded in the knowing of who you are. Because when your presence is strong enough, it speaks before you do. It holds the room without raising its voice. It silences accusation without a single rebuttal. Stillness is not what weak people use to escape confrontation. Stillness is what strong people use to dominate the battlefield without ever swinging a sword. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that is what silence forces them to do. When you say nothing, they are left alone with themselves, with their assumptions, their projections, and it makes them uncomfortable. But that is not your problem. Your job is not to carry their discomfort. Your job is to carry your peace. Most people speak to soothe their insecurity, but the Stoic waits, watches, observes. They know that not all silence is the same. Some silence comes from fear. But the kind we speak of now, this silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is discipline. It is maturity. It is power. You do not owe every voice a reply. You do not owe every attack a defense. You owe yourself the dignity to remain still while others unravel. And when they see you sitting in peace while they scramble for control, you teach them a lesson they will never forget. You teach them that real power is not loud. It does not need to be. Because power that is rooted in self does not need to react. It already is. And that is the kind of presence that changes the temperature of a room. That is the kind of silence that echoes long after the words have faded. Not through force, but through command. So the next time someone pushes, pauses, or provokes, stand still. Let them speak. Let them guess. Let them twist. And let your silence answer for you. Because silence, when rooted in truth, is the most undeniable sound in the world. Power is not taken from you. It is surrendered. And most people hand it over the moment they open their mouth. Not because they are weak, but because they have not been taught any other way. They believe reaction is power. They think a fast comeback is strength. But the truth is this: emotional reaction is not strength. It is exposure. When you react, you show your hand. You reveal your insecurity. You teach people where your buttons are. And once they know, they press them again and again. Not because they are malicious, but because you train them to. This is how you lose yourself. Not in one grand moment of collapse, but in 100 tiny reactions. They poke. You flinch. They accuse. You explain. They judge. You perform. Until your identity becomes a patchwork of other people's opinions. And that is the beginning of the end. The Stoics warned us about this. Epictetus taught, "It is not events themselves that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. That interpretation becomes emotion, and that emotion becomes action. And that action, when it is not chosen but triggered, becomes your weakness." Now ask yourself, when was the last time you truly chose your response? Not from fear, not from pride, but from clarity. Most people are so trained to react that they forget they have another option. They forget they can wait. They can breathe. They can let the wave rise and let it pass. That is emotional mastery. It is not suppression. It is sovereignty. It is not pretending to be fine. It is knowing that your peace is not for sale. It is knowing that just because someone invites you to chaos, you do not have to attend. You do not need to match their energy. You do not need to mirror their emotion. You do not need to correct their misunderstanding. What you need is to remain grounded, rooted in who you are, because people cannot manipulate what they cannot move. And once they realize that their provocations no longer pull you in, they stop trying. Because their power over you was never real. It was rented, and your emotional reaction was the rent they were collecting. But when you choose stillness, you stop paying. And in that choice, you reclaim everything. There is a strange kind of reversal that happens when you refuse to engage. A quiet shift in gravity, and it changes the dynamic entirely. You've seen it before. Someone throws a jab, their voice sharp, their words pointed. They expect a reaction, a defense, a scramble, but it does not come. Instead, there is silence, stillness, calm, and suddenly, the one who attacked begins to look unsure. They glance around, seeking validation. They repeat themselves, louder this time, but the silence remains. Now something powerful is happening. They are no longer in control of the moment. You are, and you did it by doing nothing. Because stillness flips the frame. It removes you from their story and forces them to face their own. The Stoics knew that silence does not only protect you, it exposes them. Because without your reaction to feed on, their narrative loses fuel. What they wanted was a performance, a protest, a plea. What they got was presence, a kind of immovable clarity that cannot be argued with. When you choose not to explain yourself, you are not hiding. You are holding. You are anchoring yourself in something deeper than opinion. You are telling the world, I do not live in your frame. I live in my own. And that is terrifying to people who need control, who need you to respond a certain way so they can stay comfortable in their own illusion. But when you don't respond, you remove the mirror they want. And suddenly, they are left only with themselves. Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And your silence becomes that irritation. It becomes a mirror, not of your weakness, but of their projections, their insecurities, their noise. And while they stare into it, wondering why you have not reacted, you remain steady. And the room begins to shift. Others notice, not your words, but your composure. They see the contrast, the noise versus the quiet, the grasping versus the grounded, and they feel it. Not because you demanded their attention, but because you held it without asking. That is the true power of stillness. Not in what it avoids, but in what it reveals. So the next time someone tries to bait you, pause it. Let them spin their stories. Let them fill the space with noise. And while they speak, you remain still. Because stillness is not passive. It is presence in its highest form. And presence, true presence, does not react. It redefines the entire moment. Approval is seductive. It wears many faces. Sometimes it looks like agreement. Sometimes it feels like validation. But most of the time, it's just a quiet craving to be seen. You say you want peace, but deep down, you want them to like you, to understand you, to say you were right. That desire, left unchecked, will run your entire life. You will dress it up as kindness. Call it empathy. Pretend you're just being reasonable. But what you're really doing is negotiating your identity for their comfort. That's the danger. Because peace is not found in their approval. Peace is found in your principles. And once you place their opinion above your values, you trade something priceless for something unstable. Marcus Aurelius wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. It is not what they said. It is what you made it mean. You made it mean you are wrong. You made it mean you are unworthy. You made it mean you need to speak up, clarify, earn back their favor. But what if you didn't? What if you could hear their disapproval and still remain whole? That is the mark of someone who has outgrown the addiction to approval. They hear the judgment. They see the rejection. And still, they do not move because they know that peace is not borrowed from someone else's agreement. It is built inside, quietly and daily. You cannot control who likes you. You cannot shape every opinion in your direction, but you can control who you become, regardless of what they think. That is power, not in applause, but in alignment. Most people lose themselves in the noise because they forget the difference between being respected and being liked. Being liked feels warm. It's soft, immediate, reassuring. But being respected, that takes time. And it often begins with silence. Because the one who always explains is seeking approval. But the one who holds their ground, even when misunderstood, commands something far greater. They don't need to be seen to know they matter. They don't need to be liked to walk in peace. They've made peace with themselves. And that is the foundation no storm can shake. Real power does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice. It does not prove its worth, because it does not need to. Power shows up in what you choose not to do, not in how loud you are, but in what you let pass without touching. You want to prove your side. You want to fix the narrative. You want them to know they're wrong. But all of that is noise. All of that is distraction. The need to prove is just the fear of not being seen. And the more you prove, the less power you hold. Because now you are playing by their rules. Now you are reacting. Now they lead, and you follow. The Stoics understood this long before we had the language to describe it. Seneca said, "He who angers you conquers you." And what is anger but an attempt to prove something? When you defend your name, at every insult, you lower it. You make it common. You put your dignity on public display and let the crowd decide what it's worth. But when you withhold, when you listen and choose silence, you send a different message. You say, "I don't need to fight this, because this doesn't define me." You don't build strength by proving your strength. You build it by refusing to break when someone doubts it. Think of a mountain. It doesn't argue with the storm. It doesn't plead with the wind. It stands, quiet, immovable. Not because it resists the weather, but because it has built something deeper. That is what you must become. A presence so steady that no insult, no judgment, no manipulation can pull you from center. And yes, they will misunderstand you. Yes, they will say you are arrogant, cold, disconnected. Let them, because the people who matter do not need a performance to believe in your character. And the ones who do are not your responsibility to convince. You are not here to defend yourself to those who don't listen. You are here to live a life so consistent, so principled, that even in silence, your integrity is clear. You want to be powerful? Then learn to resist the bait. Learn to hold your tongue. Learn to walk away without looking back. Not because you're weak, but because your energy is too valuable to be thrown into battles that don't deserve it. Restraint is not hesitation. It is precision. It is knowing you could destroy with your words, but choosing instead to let your composure speak louder than any reply. Because power is not what you unleash. It's what you withhold, without ever losing yourself in the process. Being liked is comfortable. It feels warm, familiar. It scratches the surface of your soul and says, "You belong." But comfort is not the same as respect. And the deeper you go in life, the more you'll realize this truth. Being liked is about meeting expectations. Being respected is about exceeding your own. One follows the crowd, the other shapes it. But most people confuse the two. They speak in soft tones. They avoid conflict. They say yes when they mean no. Because somewhere along the way, they learned that likability equals safety. And so they bend. They perform. They try to be digestible to everyone they meet. But you cannot build a meaningful life on the fragile ground of constant agreement. Because the more you chase likability, the more you abandon authenticity. And that trade is far too expensive. Respect is built in stillness, in saying nothing when the moment begs for performance, in refusing to flinch. Even when you are misunderstood, people will call you names. They will assign labels you never asked for. They will twist your silence into guilt and your calm into coldness. Let them, because those who truly see you do not need an explanation, and those who demand one are not the audience you were meant for. When you stand in silence and let the noise pass by, you create distance, not out of arrogance, but out of discipline. And in that distance, people begin to reflect. They wonder why you did not react, why you did not explain, why you did not defend your side. And slowly, without saying a word, you earn something far greater than applause. You earn respect, not because you tried harder, but because you stopped trying altogether. And that is the beginning of something rare, something quiet, something unforgettable. In a world addicted to noise, the quietest voice carries the sharpest edge. Everyone is talking. Everyone is selling. Everyone is performing. But very few are watching. Very few are listening. Very few are still. And that is where influence begins. Not in the spotlight, not in the shouting, but in the discipline to say nothing until it truly matters. The one who speaks all the time is easy to tune out, but the one who speaks less makes people lean in. Stillness is not emptiness. It is a presence that commands attention without asking for it. It says, I know who I am, and I am not here to convince you. And that kind of presence is impossible to ignore, because when you do not chase attention, you become magnetic. Not because you pulled others in, but because you stopped chasing them. Influence is not built in volume. It is built in integrity, in the way you carry yourself when everyone is watching, and even more so when no one is. It is built in how you respond when others misjudge you, in how you hold your frame when they try to twist your image, in how you stay composed when chaos invites you in. That's what people remember, not the words you said, but the weight you carried. Not how loud you were, but how calm you remained when everyone else lost their balance. Influence is not earned by proving. It is earned by embodying, by living the very truth you refuse to argue about. You don't have to dominate a room. You just have to hold your center. Because when others crumble under pressure, and you do not flinch, you become the anchor. And anchors are rare. Most people drift. They follow the wind of attention, always moving, always adjusting. But not you. You stay grounded, rooted in clarity, rooted in discipline, rooted in something deeper than applause. And in that stillness, you rise, not because you climb for visibility, but because you stood for something so quietly that the world had to look up to notice. You don't build a strong reputation by explaining yourself. You build it by not needing to. The people who are most respected in this world aren't the ones who speak the most. They're the ones who don't flinch when silence is the hardest thing to hold. Because restraint is not weakness. It's refinement. It's discipline. It's a declaration, not of arrogance, but of clarity. Most people want to be respected. They want influence. They want to walk into a room and carry weight. But they forget one thing. That kind of presence is not built in reaction. It's built in repetition. Every time you resist the urge to clap back, every time you let someone misunderstand you, every time you stay rooted in who you are, instead of chasing perception, you are building something invisible but undeniable, a silent strength. And it follows you. It walks in the room before you speak. It lingers long after you leave. It says, this person is grounded. This person cannot be shaken. People feel it. They adjust around it, not because you forced them to, but because you gave them no chaos to push against. You want to be powerful? Then become unreadable. Become the kind of person who doesn't need to prove their worth, because it radiates without permission. Let others debate. Let them accuse. Let them spin stories. And while they move in circles, you move in silence, because your restraint tells the story they can't rewrite. Your presence delivers the message they can't refute. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, just unshakable. And that is what lasts. Think back to the last time someone misunderstood you, called you something you are not, twisted your silence into guilt, tried to pull you into their storm. And ask yourself, did explaining yourself ever make you feel whole? Did defending your name restore your peace? Or did it leave you feeling smaller, as if your worth had to be justified like a case in court? The Stoics saw through this. They understood the world would never stop judging, that rumors would never stop spreading, that perception would always be fragile. But they also understood this, that the only thing you ever truly own is your response. Everything else is noise. And when you finally stop trying to be understood, something strange begins to happen. You become free. Free from their expectations. Free from their projections. Free from the performance you thought was necessary to be accepted. Because the truth is, you do not need to be liked to be whole. You do not need to be understood to be steady. You do not need to explain to be seen. You just need to live. Live from a place of stillness. Live from a place of principle. Live from a place where your energy is not on sale to the highest bidder. Let them misunderstand. Let them speculate. Let them tell their version of your story. Because while they talk, you build. While they accuse, you remain. While they seek chaos, you become the calm that exposes it. The world is loud. It wants your reaction. It feeds on your insecurity. It wants to pull you out of presence and into performance. But you are not here for applause. You are here for truth. You are here to become so deeply anchored in your values that nothing outside of you can shake the stillness inside you. That kind of presence cannot be taught. It must be earned, not in moments of ease, but in the quiet tension of holding your center, when everything invites you to lose it. So the next time someone questions your integrity, laughs at your path, twists your silence, do nothing. Let your presence speak. Let your actions tell the story. Let your stillness carry the final word. Because power, real power, does not shout. It sits, and it watches, and it never explains.